that feeling where you want to experience something and have that same feeling of being exposed to it for the first time. I think of everybody in this room as my friend, even if I don't know you very well. Similarly, I think everybody at home here is a friend that I just haven't had the opportunity to meet. And what do you do with your friends? You want to give them gifts. Our next speaker is a gift to the world, I think. A polyglot, a snappy dresser, a brilliant writer, and a raconteur of the finest kind. The author of a number of great books and a lot of commentary, and a person who's great to know. Would you please welcome Heidi Mastrogiovanni.
I didn't think I was going to start crying quite so soon, but apparently I am. Thank you for that deeply moving introduction, Marty. I'm honored. I'm so honored to be here with you all. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are at a distance, very close in my heart, how's my volume? Is it good?
A little bit louder, if you would.
I would love to speak a little louder. Better? It's the half Italian in me wanting to speak a little louder. Thank you so much for having me here today. I don't know when I first heard the word carcinophobe. I understood the meaning by seeing its relationship to carcinogenic and phobia. But I also wanted to look up the definition because I'm a word nerd. I had to search in an actual book because there were no online dictionaries, because there was no such thing as online back then. A carcinophobe is someone with an abnormal fear of cancer. I'm not quite sure what constitutes abnormal. I think we can all agree that cancer is pretty terrifying. I have been a carcinophobe for as long as I can remember. I don't get headaches, I get brain tumors. Things you should not do if you're a carcinophobe. Do not watch the movie Terms of Endearment. I don't follow my own advice in this regard because sometimes an ugly cry can be very cleansing. Do not type the words, "Is this pain in my arm cancer?" into Google. Things you should do if you're a carcinophobe. Do get regular screening tests and take good care of your overall health. Do that even if you're not a carcinophobe. Do be grateful for every day. Yeah, even if you're not a carcinophobe. My first husband, Dennis, had been having issues with his stomach for some time. In hindsight, I still, decades later, have no idea why I wasn't worried that it could be anything that couldn't be solved. I didn't obsess about anything serious being wrong with Dennis. Honestly, I didn't even consider that as a possibility and then dismiss it. There's a large element of irony there, given that for as long as I can remember, even as a child, if I bumped my leg and the next day it was sore, and I had for a moment forgotten that I had bumped it, my first thought upon feeling the ache would be, yep, probably leukemia. Dennis had to have a test that his GP recommended. I went with him. Rose-colored glasses were so securely on my face, I didn't even notice that I had been sitting in the waiting room of the gastroenterologist's office reading delicious gossip magazine after delicious gossip magazine for a very, very, very long time before the nurse came out, called my name, and said that the doctor wanted to speak with me. I walked down the hallway with her to the doctor's office without a moment's fear or concern. It somehow never occurred to me that the problem with Dennis's tummy could be anything worse than an ulcer. And then the doctor came into the office and said the words that destroyed my life as it was then. Your husband has a growth on his stomach. More tests had to be scheduled, but there was still hope. The growth could be benign, and if it were not benign, the disease could still be isolated and could be treated surgically and with chemotherapy. And Dennis could be cured and could be well for many years to come. Before the test results came back, we met with a surgeon to discuss removing the growth. Surgeons apparently have a bad reputation for being too tunnel vision with their particular area of expertise and for acting a bit like God. This guy said to me, mercifully without Dennis in the consulting room at the time, "Of course, if it's cancer, there's nothing we can do for him." Let me guess, pal. You skipped class in med school the day they taught bedside manner 101? Every piece of news we got was bad. The growth was malignant, and it had spread to Dennis's bones and lungs. Dennis died just under 6 months after his diagnosis. He faced his illness with incredible strength and courage and grace. He was an inspiration to me, to our family, to our friends. Dennis was very clear with his medical team at the Cancer Center at Cedars-Sinai that the quality of his life was much more important to him than the quantity. And, probably because that would be my decision as well, I respected his choice. And so did the hospice nurses who cared for him in the last 6 weeks of his life. Dennis was in our home in a hospital bed. Remember that scene in that movie I don't watch, Terms of Endearment? The one where Shirley MacLaine is going out of her mind, screaming at the nurses in the hospital because it's after 10 o'clock and her daughter has to wait until 10 o'clock to get her pain shot and they haven't given it to her yet and her daughter is in pain. None of that happened with our wonderful hospice nurse angels. They told us, push that morphine drip button as many times as you need to. He doesn't have to be in pain. And we did push it all the time. And Dennis wasn't in pain. And the morphine helped him die peacefully. And so, at the age of 41, I joined a club that no one wants to belong to. The bigger group is made up of people who have had someone they love die. I had had people I loved die, my grandparents. Dennis's was the first death I experienced that was so incredibly close to my heart. There are, of course, subgroups within that overall group. Dennis's brothers felt and feel his loss in ways that were and are different from the way I felt and feel it. Losing a parent is different from losing a spouse or a sibling. And the timing of when that happens is, I think, very significant. I was in my late 50s when my parents died. A sad loss, but not, to my way of thinking, a tragic one. My parents were both almost 90. They had good and long lives, and I'm grateful for that. I can't begin to find the words to talk about a parent losing a child. It is a loss that is simply too horrible for words. While Dennis was in hospice, and certainly since then, I have reflected on the subgroups within the category of widow and widower. With cancer or any terminal illness, you know the end is coming soon, which is a terrible knowledge, but it does make you aware of the urgency of saying everything you need to say to the person who is sick. I have friends who have lost their spouses to a sudden death, accident, heart attack, which is a very different experience, and perhaps a reminder to not wait to say the things you need to say to the people you love. During Dennis's illness and after his passing, there were people in my life who had lost their spouses, who were tremendously helpful and comforting to me. They knew what I was going through. I had been in a caregiver support group at the Wellness Community, an organization founded to help people with cancer and the people who care for them. The Wellness Community helped save my sanity. In 2009, the Wellness Community and Gilda's Club Worldwide, a support organization founded in 1995 to honor Gilda Radner, became one organization, which is now called the Cancer Support Community. They merged to create double the love and care and kindness. These people are doing something indescribably essential and wonderful for people who are suffering. These people were and are my heroes. We all became very close in our caregiver support group. And then we all lost our loved ones around the same time. And our caregiver support group became a grief support group, still led by our wonderful Lola. Lola saved my life. Sometimes, after your life has been shattered, I think it's understandably tempting to just give up, whatever form giving up might take. After one of our group meetings, Lola and I were talking. She had been widowed 25 years earlier, and she had gotten to the other side of grief. She said words to me that I have since repeated to many people who have been navigating through the process of grieving. Lola told me, "I promise you will be happy again. If you want me to get that statement notarized, I will." She spoke from personal experience, and I now speak from personal experience. Lola's words got me through many a dark night of the soul, and she was right. I was happy again. I am happy again. I think it may have been said 1,000 times or more. If we could go around grief to get to the other side of it, we probably all would. But it just doesn't seem to work that way. The only way past the pain of grieving does seem to be going through it. And I think what really helps with the agony of grief is when we help each other, when we comfort each other, when we act as a wellness community. And when we're grieving, in my experience, it's important to ask for help as you comfort yourself so you can heal. I did make the members of my grief support group yell at me during one meeting when I told them about going to the Social Security office alone. Back then, a lot of bureaucratic stuff had to be done in person. I went into the office to collect a one-time Social Security benefit, and I sat down. And when the very nice woman at the desk said hello and asked how she could help me, I promptly started sobbing, and it took me a long time to stop. I imagine that dear woman encountered a lot of sobbing people. She was very kind to me, which made me cry more because kindness has a way of doing that. My friends in my support group were livid that I hadn't asked one of them to come with me, and they were right. I guess I didn't want to bother anyone. I guess I thought I could suck it up and get through that appointment on my own. My advice to my friends and family when they are grieving includes don't go to appointments like that on your own. The people who love you want to help. Let them help. It makes a big difference in the healing process because it is a process. And it is, I feel sure you all know, a part of life. One of my dearest friends lost his husband to cancer a few years before Dennis died. He said something life-altering while Dennis was sick. We were reflecting on love and loss, and he said, the answer to the question, why me, really is, why not you? Why not all of us? And that's a rhetorical question, of course, because it is all of us. This is life. As I know you know, we're all going to die. It's just a question of when and how. And given that, it is inevitable that some of us will be left behind. And one day, we will all leave people behind to mourn us, if we've lived a good life. If we live long enough, we will lose someone we love. And sometimes we don't even have to live very long. I have 3 women in my life to whom I am very close. One is a very dear friend. Dennis and I introduced her to her husband. One is my sister-in-law. Her husband and Dennis were brothers. They were in fact born on the same day, 5 years apart. And they both married women named Heidi. Yes, my sister-in-law's name is the same fairly unusual name as mine. And one is my aunt, who was also one of my closest friends. She was married to my father's brother, Anthony, or Antony, as we pronounced it on my Italian side of the family. All these wonderful women have one daughter, and their daughters are among my favorite people in the world. These women all lost their husbands at a far too young age. And those 3 daughters all lost their fathers when they were around 15 years old. If we live long enough, and sometimes we don't even have to live very long. My Aunt Mary lost her husband Tony years before Dennis died. Her experience as a widow helped me when I was widowed. And then when my dear friend and my sister-in-law lost their husbands, I was able to help them. I see helping each other, not just in this respect, as a sacred duty. I see us all as a community. That's why I'm a Democrat. Yes, another subject for another time, but I couldn't resist adding that. So what do we do? I think from my experience, we rebuild our lives. If we choose to, we do the best we can. For me, part of comforting myself while I healed involved doing more of what had meaning for me. I love animals. When I first met Dennis in New York City, he had a wonderful, grumpy old cat named Mr. Joe, who profoundly resented my appearance on the scene. I imagined that the look he was giving Dennis when I moved into their apartment was meant to convey, seriously? She's gonna live here now? Did you want to check with me to see if that's okay? Because it's not. I was not going to let Mr. Joe's loathing of me be a problem for very long. As soon as I took over the job of opening his cans of cat food, Mr. Joe decided I was his second favorite person ever. I could never supplant his beloved Dennis, who had adopted him from the ASPCA, which was A-okay with me, because the way that Dennis and Mr. Joe loved each other was one of the big things that appealed to me about Dennis when I first met him. Mr. Joe died at a very old age while we were still living in New York. When Dennis and I moved to Los Angeles, we adopted 2 rescued kittens. And then, on the Thanksgiving before Dennis died in February, my parents were visiting us from Connecticut. My mother and I were throwing out a bag of garbage behind our apartment building, and a little cat jumped out of the dumpster. Of course, I wanted to adopt her, and Dennis agreed. The actual words he used were, "It's your decision." I feel sure he knew that he wouldn't be in this world with that new cat for very long. We named her Faith. And since T.S. Eliot felt strongly that cats must have 3 different names, she also ended up with the monikers Marpotus Mompeti, Starkeisha the Mimosa, and Thud, because Faith was small but very sturdy and quite dense, and when she jumped down from the table or the counter or wherever, the floor actually shook. Faith and he spent the last 2 weeks of Dennis's life cuddling with him in his hospital bed in our home. I will always be grateful to that sweet little girl for doing that, and for being there to cuddle with me as I grieved. As I sought to comfort myself after Dennis died, I started doing a lot more volunteering with animal rescue and animal welfare groups, and that helped me a lot. It helped me get out of the house, it helped me get out of myself. I highly recommend helping others as a way to help yourself. If that's your thing, I recommend letting yourself do your thing while you heal. I do also highly recommend finding humor wherever you can while you heal. I had loved being married to Dennis, and I loved being married. I loved having a partner in life. And so, about 2 years after Dennis died, I started thinking that maybe having a new partner could be part of rebuilding my life. I let my friends and family know that I might possibly be ready to start dating, and I asked them to keep an eye out for someone who might be right for me. This was just after the turn of the millennium, and dating apps were not ubiquitous. There were some dating websites or something, I've blocked out the details, and everyone was encouraging me to give them a try, expand the dating pool. And so, I had a coffee date with a nice-looking fellow a few years my senior. We were having a pleasant time over our cappuccinos, and he said he was an actor. And I asked what I would have seen him in, and he said he played the title character in the movie Flesh Gordon. F-L-E-S-H Gordon. I was on a date with a softcore porn star. I did giggle when he told me, which I immediately realized could be considered rude, even though I truly hadn't intended it that way. Thankfully, he didn't seem offended. I confess that I hadn't seen his star vehicle yet, but I would be sure to watch it as soon as possible, which I did. The movie was kind of silly, but it was also kind of hot. My next date with him didn't go quite as well as the first, so it was our last date, which is all to the better, because that freed me up to meet my second husband, Tom. More on this later. I was raised Catholic. My very Italian last name probably makes that a pretty safe assumption. And I haven't been a member of any organized religion since I had my confirmation. And my parents told me that after that milestone, I was no longer required to go to church, which I immediately stopped doing. I am, on my best days, an agnostic. I really, really, really hope there is a benevolent force guiding the universe. But I have yet to be able to reconcile that concept with childhood cancer and the Holocaust. My Aunt Mary and Uncle Tony's individual relationship with their Catholic faith was profound, and it was a tremendous comfort to them while Tony was battling his fatal illness. It was a tremendous comfort to my aunt after my uncle died. When Dennis's doctor called to tell us that his growth was malignant, I immediately called Mary. I asked her if she thought Tony, who had died years before, was okay. Without hesitation, she answered, "I know he's okay." And then I asked if she thought she would see Tony again. And without hesitation, she answered, "I know I will see Tony again." I was, in effect, asking Mary if there is an afterlife, because I feared that Dennis would die from his illness. And I wanted a promise that the end of his body wouldn't mean the end of him. Months later, I asked the wonderful nurse who was in charge of our wonderful hospice team if she thought there was life after death. She said she didn't think she could do the work that she was doing if she didn't have some faith that there was something beyond the world that we could see here. Faith, a good thing to have whenever you can. Also a good name for a cat, I think. And despite my fluctuating relationship with faith, the concept, not the cat, I do have to say that the threads that had to come together for me to meet my wonderful second husband, Tom, are, to me, nothing short of miraculous. Tom and I met at Molly Malone's, the Irish pub on Fairfax, on September 30th, 2001. It was 3 days after what would have been Dennis's 50th birthday. All of us who love Dennis, and our name is Legion, for we are many, gathered to honor him at St. Nick's, which was on 3rd Street and was Dennis's favorite Irish pub. Yes, there was a period of time when Irish pubs figured quite prominently in my life. There were lots of memories that night, lots of laughter and lots of tears. When I got home to my 3 cats, I swear I cried so much. I remember thinking, if it were possible for a body to die from the shedding of tears, I would have perished that night. And then, just 3 days later, my own Act 2 fully began. I was at a party at Molly Malone's for a friend's boyfriend who had released a CD. Tom had just moved to LA and was a big fan of this musician, and he happened to see in the LA Weekly that there would be a party celebrating his work that night. And so Tom went to the party, and so I met him. Sometimes, when I wake up with a massive anxiety attack at 4 in the morning because of the state of our world, I add additional twitching to my repertoire of reasons to do the diametric opposite of relaxing by imagining what would have happened if Tom hadn't, by chance, by fate, by divine design, picked up that particular issue of that free publication. I am so grateful that he did. P.S. Tom is allergic to cats. When his allergist commented that he wasn't allergic to anything but cats, Tom said he wasn't about to give his new girlfriend an ultimatum, because he knew what I would choose. Yep, the cats were there first. P.P.S. I'm allergic to cats. I was allergic to Mr. Joe. I knew Dennis wouldn't renege on the promise he made to Mr. Joe. I used inhalers. I got allergy shots. Mr. Joe got allergy baths at the groomer. He complained, but I think he secretly liked being fussed over and looking even more devastatingly handsome after his spa treatments. It is absolutely possible to live with a cat, even when you have allergies. I'll get off my soapbox now. No, I won't. A commitment to an animal should be lifetime. Yes, another subject for another time, but I couldn't resist adding that. You know those memes about what 3 words of advice would you give your younger self? I would urge the Heidi in her 20s and 30s to pay attention. I realize that's 2 words. I assure you that whenever I convey this wisdom to my younger self, an enthusiastic expletive is added at the beginning to bring the word count to 3. I pretty much floated through life before Dennis got sick. I hope that I'm a better person now than I was then. I was glib and prickly before Dennis's diagnosis, and before I saw Dennis deal with his illness and impending death with so much grace. What a high price that wonderful man had to pay for me to start paying attention to the things that are really important in life. I once read a profoundly moving article called Dancing with My Father by Nicole Lemberger, whose father died when she was 21. I haven't been able to speak to Dennis for over 23 years. I have the option of seeing photos of him, and I have the option of watching videos of him, He was a wonderful actor. I am able to look at the photos and smile, but it's still too painful for me to watch videos and to hear his voice. Or I imagine it would be because I haven't done it yet. One of the things I love most about being married is the shorthand of being a couple for a long time. I can make one-word references to a scene in a movie and Tom knows exactly what I'm talking about. We have shared so many experiences and adventures. We have the same language. Dennis and I had that as well. But now, when I hear or see something that he would enjoy as much as I do, I can't share it with him. Before I read Nicole Lemberger's article, I had been thinking a lot about what it would be like to see Dennis again. As time passes, I have less and less of a visceral memory of what it was like to spend time with Dennis. Someone I saw just about every day for years and years has faded from my vivid memory. In a way, that's a good thing. The first agonizing months after his death, I couldn't think of him without sobbing, and I couldn't stop thinking about him. Now, I am able to think of him and smile. I might get a bit teary, but it's not that horrible, overwhelming grief of the months after he died. And so these words from Lemberger's article vividly resonated for me. But the true tragedy of losing someone you love unfolds over time. There's the loss itself, the empty space that used to be filled by that person, his voice, the sound of his footfalls in the hallway. And then there's the fact that the sorrow you feel changes you, so that you are no longer the person you once knew. My father's death set in motion a series of changes in me, such that I wonder whether he would recognize the person I've become. As the years pass, he is more and more lost to me. What would I say to Dennis if I saw him again? How would I share with him all the adventures and changes and accomplishments and challenges of my life since he left me behind? His death has changed me. The sorrow and anguish have changed me. I have learned so much at such a high price for him. He wouldn't know me anymore. He might like me more as I am now than I was when I was with him at such a high price. The truth is that I am so much happier now than I ever have been because of the lessons I have learned. And those lessons really started when Dennis was diagnosed. And saying that, and thinking it, as I often have, feels like a betrayal of Dennis. But at the same time, I feel sure that he wouldn't see it that way. When he was sick, and this is something I only found out after he died, if friends and family asked him how he was, he always said that he was fine, but please take care of Heidi. That's all he cared about. He knew he would die, and he wanted to make sure I would be okay. I can't ever not cry at that particular sentence. Our friends and family more than honored Dennis's request. They surrounded us with love and care while Dennis was sick, and they surrounded me with love and care after he died. One of my dear friends from college sent me a copy of A Time to Grieve, an incredibly soothing book by an author named Carol Stoddicker. I now send it to people who are grieving. Dennis's oldest brother, Patrick, who lives in Barcelona with his wife, stayed with me in Los Angeles for 3 months after Dennis died. I truly am not 100% sure I could have gotten through those first minutes and hours and days and weeks without Patrick. My friends and family embraced Tom when I met him and fell in love with him, and they made him part of our extended family. I imagine that Dennis is very happy about this. I imagine that he would like Tom very much. They're both great guys. I am very, very, very lucky. And as I said, I think you do have to find humor where you can, even if the respite of laughter is only for a few moments while you're grieving. And I do love quotations, so I have to share a few on this subject that I especially appreciate. Lord Byron said, "Always laugh when you can. It is cheap medicine." Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, said, "I never would have made it if I could not have laughed. It lifted me momentarily out of this horrible situation, just enough to make it livable." And in the first Sex and the City movie, when Carrie is anguished after her wedding has been canceled, and she asks her friend if she will ever laugh again, her friend says, "Yes, when something is really, really funny." That has been my experience. Humor offered me a break from the sadness,
Laughing gave me much needed moments to release the tension I was carrying in my body and my soul. It was just a few weeks after Dennis died that I was able to have a real belly laugh, thanks to my mother. Dennis was a dedicated fan of the Ultimate Fighting Championships, which are mixed martial arts competitions. I remember that at least in the late 1990s, they took place in a ring called the Octagon. And I remember that Dennis loved that the fights had very few rules. I think the governing organization has since added some guidelines and limitations. I imagine Dennis railing against that up in heaven. Dennis took the Ultimate Fighting bouts very seriously. They were at the time only accessible via pay-per-view. Dennis would invite a few people over. He would order a 6-foot hero from Subway. There would be extensive reserves of booze, and I would be sure to have other plans on those evenings. Just a few weeks after Dennis died, there was an Ultimate Fighting Championship, and a very dear friend of ours hosted a group at her house to watch it. My parents were there, and my brother-in-law Patrick was there, and several of Dennis's and my closest friends were there. My mother was sitting next to me on the couch. At one point, Patrick said something very funny, and everyone laughed, and my mother, who had a very deep voice and a very heavy German accent, nudged me and said, "Oh, you like Pat?" It seems she was trying to fix me up with my brother-in-law, which is actually quite an honored tradition in old Europe. She was probably remembering that Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was his brother's widow, which didn't turn out all that great for Catherine, but at least she was just divorced and not beheaded. I did a classic spit take, and I said in a stage whisper, "Mother, my husband just died. I'm not yet at the point of eyeing his brother as a potential replacement." Recently, I revisited two of my favorite books from childhood, both by Frances Hodgson Burnett, A Little Princess and the Secret Garden. These words from The Secret Garden, about a man who had begun to heal from grief and from the physical illness inspired by grief, spoke to me. Strange as it seemed to him, there were minutes, sometimes half hours, when, without his knowing why, the black burden seemed to lift itself again, and he knew he was a living man. That was my experience of healing from grief. Shortly after Dennis died, one of my dearest friends said that all the things I was doing then were things that were reminding me of Dennis, because they were things that I had done when he was still with me. And it was painful to be reminded that he wasn't there any longer. But slowly, gradually, I would start doing new things. I would start building new habits and traditions, and the pain would be less. She was right. Slowly and gradually, the time between the horrible depths of grief became longer and longer, and the depths became less deep. And eventually, I was on the other side of grief. Now, 23 plus years later, when I speak of Dennis, even if I get teary, I'm happy to get teary, because it means that I remember and treasure how much he will always mean to me. The open wound that was the loss of Dennis has healed. It is now a scar. I would never want that scar to disappear. It is a precious reminder of him. I hope there's also humor to be found in this story about a health scare my beloved husband Tom had 6 years ago. I did run this by him, and he said it was okay to share. In 2016, Tom had a heart attack. His genetics were tipping the scales in that direction. His father and both his brothers had already had heart attacks. That's not the humorous part. Tom had a stent put in, and he exercises regularly now, and he's in great shape. By the way, here's something I learned from Tom's recovery process. Before his heart attack, I used to strongly suggest every day that he get some exercise. Well, no one bothered to tell me that in a marriage, and probably in most relationships. Nagging? Not as effective as your cardiologist telling you that you had better start a consistent exercise program. When news of Tom's heart attack was conveyed to our friends and family, one of my very close friends who knew Dennis well called and left an outraged message to the effect of, "How dare Tom have a heart attack? Because he is not allowed to die, because her dear friend Heidi should not have to endure that again." And I laughed, because one of the first things I said to Tom when we got serious was, "Listen, you're 10 years younger than I am, so you are especially, absolutely not allowed to die before I do, because there is no way I'm going through all that pain twice. I know, life doesn't always work out the way we want it to. I'm just saying, and I will continue to maintain very adamantly that it had better work out the way I want it to in this case. Tom and I adopt senior dogs. It's my calling in life, and he very lovingly and graciously supports me in that. We have to say goodbye a lot. It's really hard. We love our dogs. They are family to us. They take a piece of our hearts with them when they cross the Rainbow Bridge. I have often been asked how we can choose, again and again, to put ourselves in a position where we will bring sadness into our lives on a regular basis. There's really only one answer I can find to that question. The only thing worse than our beloved pets leaving us would be to not have had them at all. I remember being fresh out of college and blazing a trail of madcap mayhem up and down the fabulous island of Manhattan, as you do when you're in your early 20s. After having been unceremoniously dumped by some devastatingly handsome rogue or other, trust me, I wasn't always lucky in love, I shook my fist at the heavens in response to Alfred Lord Tennyson's contention that it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. I didn't know it then, but Alfred Lord Tennyson is absolutely right about that. The program for Dennis's memorial service included one of his last headshots as an actor, and also a photograph of him when he was a toddler, sitting joyfully on a beach. There was a quotation from The Bridge of San Luis Rey by Thornton Wilder. There is a land of the living and a land of the dead, and the bridge is love, the only survival, the only meaning. As I have learned, Thornton Wilder is absolutely right about that.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Heidi, will you be hanging out after the service and being fed tea and cakes?
Thank you, I'd be honored.
Good, excellent. I just want to say that we love Tom as well. And
We love Tom.
Tom, yeah, you do not get to die.
Ever.
Yeah, ever. We're working on it. Our Unitarian scientists are working on it. Over the next, this is the last Sunday of a 5-Sunday